This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
It's a big week for the Supreme Court. Yesterday, a couple of really interesting decisions coming down and one not quite coming down. I'm going to go through them briefly, and then we'll get back to your calls at 800-848-9222. Coming up in a few minutes, we're going to go live to the UK, where we will talk with Albert Reid. Albert Reid is the former head person over at Condé Nast in Britain, and now he's become something of an expert in imagination. He has written a book which has totally stoked my imagination. I've been reading through it just since I read a Wall Street Journal book review on it over the weekend. Got my hands on an electronic copy of it on Monday, and I've been reading through it since then. I've already found some really helpful tips in this, and I suspect that you, whatever your job is, you will as well. So we'll get into that. But first, let me go through these Supreme Court cases quickly. Republican legislators appear likely to lose a significant abortion case at the Supreme Court. Now, the court hasn't officially handed down that ruling yet. So how do we know it? But yesterday, the court accidentally posted it online while releasing their other decisions. Bloomberg was able to snag the document before it was taken down. Now, look, we all make mistakes, me more than most. But wouldn't you think, with all the controversy over the leaking of the Dobbs decision, that they would be pretty careful in terms of not accidentally putting these decisions out there before they're ready? There are going to be some people that wonder, and I'm not saying this, but there will be people that wonder whether or not this was one of those unintentional, whether one of those intentional errors where for whatever reason they put this out there for some other reason and then said, oh, sorry, that was just a mistake. Who knows? But anyway, the case concerns Idaho's near total ban on abortion, specifically whether doctors can perform the procedure during a medical emergency to save the mother from suffering serious health issues. And the court, again, we think, because the document was posted and then taken right down, the court appears to rule 6-3 largely along procedural grounds, and it allows emergency procedures to continue while the courts sort out the larger legal questions around Idaho's law. It's the second time in 2 years that a major abortion ruling has become public before its official release. What do you think's going on there? Do you think this was really an accident? I do, but I could be persuaded otherwise. 800-848-9222. It'll be the second loss for abortion rights opponents this term. Just a few weeks ago, the court rejected a challenge to the FDA's approval of the abortion drug mifepristone, which is used in medical abortions. So now the court has 10 more decisions to hand down over the next 2 days, including the case that I just mentioned and the blockbusters, some of which we went over with Eric Siegel last week, on President Trump's claims of presidential immunity and the power of federal regulatory agencies. That's the so-called Chevron doctrine. There was a case yesterday that I found completely unsurprising, but a bit of a bummer nonetheless. And this is the case that we've been chronicling with Jay Bhattacharya. This is Murthy versus Missouri. And essentially, it has to do with censorship. and whether or not it's censorship for the government to turn to Facebook, to turn to Twitter, to turn to Instagram, to turn to TikTok and say, "Psst, you know, that tweet Frank Morano just put out, that's not right." And then you say, oh, thank you, Mr. Government. Let me take a look at that. Oh, yeah, I'll take a look at that. You mean you're the ones that get to decide whether I get to have all these regulatory protections, and you're saying that that's inaccurate? Oh, yeah, I will. I know exactly what to do with it. Now, meanwhile, the government says, oh, no. We didn't say anything. We didn't say to take it down. We just told them it was inaccurate. Well, look, if the owner of this radio network texts me and says, what you just said is totally wrong, completely outrageous, and a bold-faced lie, do you think that I'm going to do another 20 minutes reiterating that same thing? No, because he controls my fate, just as the way the government controls the fate of Twitter, Facebook, and these other big tech companies. It was clearly censorship. I don't want to redo all of the arguments that Dr. Bhattacharya made. I think he was absolutely right. And yesterday, the Supreme Court punted on internet censorship, sending free speech advocates like me, as the one and only Dominic Carter made clear, back to the drawing board while President Biden's White House celebrated. We heard from Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary. The Supreme Court's decision helps ensure the Biden administration can continue our important work with technology companies to protect the safety and security of the American people. Don't you love that phrase? The important work we're doing with technology companies. What is the important work? Censoring people that are putting out a message you don't agree with? Some of which, by the way, some of the things they're saying later either proven true or likely to be true. So the important work, of course, includes White House officials sending emails to companies like Facebook with notes saying things like, quote, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on having it removed ASAP. That's the important work that the Biden administration is now free, or any administration. If you love President Biden and hate President Trump, keep in mind, come January, there's a very good chance that the Trump administration is going to be in this same position to do things again. Do you want them flagging things for Facebook and Twitter and having their regulatory future in their hands? So the Supreme Court sidestepped ruling on the constitutionality of this kind of behavior. And they put out one very blunt sentence in Murthy versus Missouri. Neither the individual nor the state plaintiffs have established Article 3 standing to seek an injunction against any defendant. Now, what a crock that is. Let's be blunt here. Now, Dr. Bhattacharya was on this show. He was one of the victims of this, one of the people that was censored by Twitter for the things that he was tweeting. How does he not have standing? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. The great war on terror cop-out standing, which killed cases like Clapper versus Amnesty International and ACLU versus NSA. That was what we would hear all the time in the war on terror cases. Oh, well, we can't rule on warrantless wiretapping or torture. You don't have standing. So the cop-out of no standing reared its head again. In the last 2 decades, we've gotten used to the problem of legal challenges to new government programs being shot down precisely because the secret nature of them makes collecting evidence or showing standing or showing injury very difficult. If Twitter censors something that I'm saying, I don't know if it was censored because the government said to do it or because Twitter wanted to do it. So how do I collect the evidence of that? the only way you can do it is from, I don't know, if somebody leaks you information, someone like Julian Assange, God bless him. Otherwise, it's very difficult to prove injury or standing. And this Murthy case is no different. This is a real bummer. For plaintiffs like Dr. Bhattacharya, for their lawyers, the attorney generals in Louisiana and Missouri who brought the case, and for the people like Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, and others who worked on the Twitter file stories, this is a huge disappointment. It's not a surprise because, you could kind of tell when those arguments were happening before the Supreme Court, which direction the justices were leading. And it was clear right away that this was not going to go my way, but it's a bummer nonetheless. But given that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security reportedly resumed contact with internet platforms after oral arguments in this case in March, it led them to expect a very favorable ruling. It's pretty logical to assume that the big brothering will now resume unabated. And then lastly, this is a case that I think has probably gotten the least amount of attention, but it has to do with government corruption and who can be prosecuted as a public official for, basically being corrupt. And I think this is kind of a bummer. This is another one that is a bit of a disappointment as far as I'm concerned. You had a situation where a local elected official, I believe he was the mayor of Indianapolis. I'm going to see if I can pull that up. But you had a local elected official who was prosecuted for corruption, and it's clear that he wasn't doing the right thing. But the Supreme Court ruled in Snyder versus the United States that the federal law prohibiting state and local officials from accepting anything of value from people that may be intended to influence official actions does not apply to the acceptance of gratuities after the official act has been taken. Okay? I mean, let's think about this. I'm a mayor, and I get to dole out no bid contracts, let's say, for shelters to run migrant housing. And you're the guy that gets the no bid contract. You don't give me any money beforehand, but maybe come Christmas time, you've gotten your contract, it's all said and done. You give me a nice Christmas gift of $50,000. Isn't that bribery? Well, no, not according to the Supreme Court. According to anybody else in the world, but not according to the Supreme Court. How can it be? I have no idea, but that's where we are. So in Snyder versus United States, this federal law prohibiting state and local officials from accepting anything of value from persons that may be intended to influence official actions, it does not apply to acceptance of gratuities after the official action has been taken. This is crazy, honestly. This Supreme Court decision opens the door to state and local officials to put out a tip jar for gratuities from thankful government contractors and other people that are seeking official favors. This was a 6-3 decision, and the conservative majority ruled that a gratuity after the fact is not prohibited by the federal anti-corruption law. This ruling totally undercuts one of the most important anti-corruption statutes that prosecutors use to hold government officials accountable. And I got news for you. Here's a prediction. If Bob Menendez gets convicted in the federal trial that he's on board in now, I can see at least one of the counts being thrown out because of this Supreme Court decision. Oh, those gold bars? No, they had nothing to do with me going to bat for a developer or talking to a prosecutor about a certain criminal case or talking about what kind of food should be marked halal. Had nothing to do with it at all. They gave it to me afterwards. They gave it to me after I did all those things. And you know what? Under this Supreme Court ruling, that's going to be correct. So from my point of view, whether cash is handed to an elected official before or after the award of a government contract or other favorable action, accepting cash for favors should be barred. And until yesterday, it seemed apparent that the text of the statute covered exactly this. In light of this decision, it's up to Congress to revise the text of the statute and restore a little bit of common sense. All right. If you want to comment, feel free to do so. 800-848-9222. We've got a couple of Davids on the line. Let me first begin with David in Rockland. Hi, David.
Hey, Frank. How are you?
Great, David. What's on your mind?
Two things on the topic of reading. The first thing being that my siblings and I are all avid readers. We love to read, and I think part of the reason why we became such big readers is because growing up, if we behaved at home and at school, then as a treat, our parents would take us to the library. But my little brother wasn't such a big reader. So we were trying to think, like, how do we get him into books? He's crazy if he's not a reader. Got to be part of the family. So we started reading to him out loud when he would be playing on one of his video games.
Very nice.
And that eventually got him into reading. And now he loves to read.
Wonderful.
But besides for that, besides for the younger generation not reading nearly as much as their older generations, I've also noticed that they're not playing outside anymore. I don't see anybody on the streets anymore.
Yeah, I've talked about that a great deal. It's very disconcerting.
Yeah.
David, I'm glad you're reading. Glad you and your brother are reading. How old of a guy are you, just out of curiosity?
21.
21. Well, that's great. Those are exactly the kind of folk. Are you considered you're considered Generation Z then, right?
I guess so.
Did you hear our show yesterday on exploring why so many of Generation Z are neat, no employment, no education, no training?
No, I didn't get a chance to.
Okay, no big deal. I can understand you got a lot going on. Are any of the things that are the lot that you have going on, are you working currently?
No, I'm in college.
Oh, you're in college. So you are not one of the neats. But I'm glad you're reading, David, and I'm glad you're listening, and I hope you call again, okay?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. 800-848-9222. Another David weighing in. This time, David in the Boogie Down Bronx. Hi, David.
Yes, good morning, Frank. A couple of things. I agree with you about the corruption decision. That was terrible. What people might not know about this case is this mayor, and it wasn't in Indianapolis, it was another city, but he designed the bidding process to help this company, and then he went to them after and said, oh, I need $10,000 or $15,000, and they gave it to him. That is the very definition of public corruption. And it makes you wonder about the integrity of those 6 members of the Supreme Court, some of whom have received gifts in office. So maybe there's some conflict of issue with this case. And as far as the Bhattacharya...
Yeah, and just for the record, the Indiana town was Portage, a small Indiana city near Lake Michigan. So I was in the right state, wrong city. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it involved garbage trucks of all things.
Exactly.
But to get to the Bhattacharya case, which was written by Amy Coney Barrett and joined by Kavanaugh and Roberts, The reason they sided with the defendants in this case, the government, is that injunction, and I think we mentioned this when Bhattacharya was there the first time talking about this, that injunction went way too far. Mm-hmm. The Fifth Circuit, again, went way too far. You don't grant injunctions willy-nilly over, especially when someone doesn't have standing. Bhattacharya and the other plaintiffs could not show that they were actually damaged by the government's actions, and they sued the wrong people. If he thought Bhattacharya and these other plaintiffs thought they were harmed, they should have sued the social media companies, Facebook and whoever, Twitter, or whatever they want to call it. That's who they should have sued. And this is going to go back to the lower courts, and it'll be worked out. But I don't think they're going to prevail because the government needs to have the ability to go to these companies and say, this is from a foreign country. This particular thing, it needs to be taken down. It's a threat to national security. There are so many issues at play here, and you oversimplified it, and so is Bhattacharya. And my issue with Bhattacharya, which I didn't get into the last time because I only had like 5 seconds, Bhattacharya talked about like the New York Post thing where they suppressed the Hunter Biden story. That happened when Donald Trump was president. Okay, so this isn't a one-party thing.
No,
said.
Absolutely not. Yeah,
and the Supreme Court, I think, made the right decision. You cannot file lawsuits against people and get injunctions unless you're actually harmed. Because if that were not to happen, anybody could file a lawsuit against any government agency or other entity and have injunctions that could last for years. That would freeze our system. That cannot be allowed to stand, and that's why the conservatives, except for the 3 what I consider ultra-radical activist judges, decided that it was a bad idea. And I think you would agree with that.
Well, I agree with much of what you said. The part that I don't agree with is the fact that Bhattacharya wasn't damaged. To me, the fact that his tweets were suppressed or taken down or flagged, to me, that is damage. Now, in terms of necessary parties and him, suing the wrong entity, you may have a point there, which is why I wasn't sure which direction that the case was going to go. As to whether the injunction was too broad at the get-go, you may have a point there, and you're absolutely right in that this was not done by the Biden administration initially. It was done by the Trump administration. And, they're, to me, just as culpable in this thing as anybody else. But I do think it's a damage if your tweets are suppressed because the government flags them for a social media company.
All right, Frank, one last thing, and this is exactly related. On the subject of masking, I just say this very quickly. People like me who are vulnerable to COVID, I nearly died from it twice, we should still be able to wear a mask. What I think should be the law is that if you commit another crime, like what you said, invading a building or invading someone's personal space or assaulting someone, and you're wearing a mask, there should be extra penalties for that. That way you cover the criminals, and people like me who may need to wear a mask for actual health reasons are still able to do so. And also, people who want to express their free speech without hurting anybody may want to wear a mask because they're afraid of being canceled. That's a legitimate reason to wear a mask also, possibly.
So Governor Hochul in New York, Mayor Bass in California, you don't think that they're going along the right track in terms of banning these masks at protests?
I think they're overdoing it, Frank. There are legitimate reasons to protest things that may not be popular.
Right.
And people may not want to be identified. I mean, when you have those white nationalist marches in different places, those people wear face coverings as well. And they should be able to because, listen, obviously I don't agree with white supremacy, but those people could lose their jobs if they're identified doing a protest, which is protected speech. You should not be afraid to exercise your First Amendment rights. And in today's society, because we live in cancel culture, which I know you don't like, people should be able to protect their identity unless they're breaking the law. That's when people need to face consequences for wearing a mask. And I hope that we can agree on that at least, because I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, David, look, thank you. Great call. I recognize the importance of being anonymous at times for exactly the reasons that David just cited. This is one of the reasons that I thought it was so laughable that Nikki Haley thought you should have a government issued ID in order to have a Facebook page. You know, if you look at the authors of the Federalist Papers, they used pseudonyms. A lot of great writers throughout history did. I mean, it's just silly. But what we're seeing in these protests, many protests, is these masks not being used for what David is talking about, which is, David brought up two issues. He brought up medical issues, and then he brought up a need to not be canceled. But for people on the medical front, people are not wearing it because they're afraid of a disease. They're wearing it to conceal who they are. And then in many cases, they're committing crimes. The New York provision, I don't know what LA is going to do, but the New York provision does make an exception for masks that are medically necessary. Okay, I could deal with that. But as far as people should be able to wear a mask to avoid being canceled, no, I don't agree with that. I understand where David is coming from, but to me, it's too much of an invitation to, when you're in public and doing something like that, to go a little too far and commit a crime. And then it's very difficult to be able to arrest you. But look, David brings up a good point, and he's given me a lot to think about. Hopefully you as well. Speaking of thinking, one of the things that I just am intrigued by is imagination. How do two people who have the same job, they're the same age, same gender, same race, how does one come up with all sorts of great ideas and the other doesn't? What is it about imagination in the mind of person A that's working really well and that's lacking in the mind of person B? I get some of my best ideas in the shower. And because of that, and I think part of it is because I'm not distracted by phones and radios and television and whatever else, screaming 2-year-old. Because of that, I try on Saturdays, I haven't been successful lately, but I try on Saturdays to avoid any sort of electronics. And I do find that I have a lot of great ideas. And I'll never forget when I talked about this for the first time. A gentleman who was an observant Jew called in, and he's a Sabbath observer, and he has no electronics on Saturdays either. And he said, look, I don't use any electronics on Saturdays, and I'm not getting any great ideas. Why am I getting a ton of great ideas and he is not? Not sure. We'll get into it with Albert Reid, who has written a book called The Imagination Muscle. He joins us live from the UK. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is Greg Kelly for Priority Gold. What does it mean to be America's precious metals dealer? It means that you're in touch with the hearts and minds of those who love this country, value our freedom, and want to protect the future. Priority Gold is that precious metals dealer. They've helped thousands of Americans back their retirement with solid gold and silver. Call Priority Gold at 888-506-6439. Receive free shipping, free storage, a free investment guide, and one of the best purchase experiences in the industry. Call now or go to PriorityGold.com.
Faztech Industries helps with all your construction, demolition, and weekly waste removal in all 5 boroughs of New York and every corner of New Jersey. Faztech is the #1 provider of recycled products and the #1 provider of roll-off containers. Call Joe Costanzo at 718-494-1600. 718-494-1600.
When you protect your corn and soy crops with Miravis Neal fungicide, you'll start seeing a lot more than just cleaner and greener fields. You'll get longer-lasting disease control, better plant health benefits, less plant stress, higher potential yield, and increased ROI potential. Ask your Syngenta retailer about Miravis Neo and start seeing more green in your fields, on your yield monitor, and in your wallet. Always read and follow label instructions.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
A Monday warrior, mean strike. Today's Tom Sawyer, mean pride.
Tom Sawyer by Rush, a birthday bumper music selection by the one and only Matt Blaze. I am intrigued by the idea of imagination. Why do some people have a really active imagination and others do not? Why do some people suffer writer's block for 3, 4, 5 weeks, can't write a sentence, and people like Stephen King write a book a day, or so it seems? Why do some people have imagination and others not? There are days when I'm trying to put together the content of this show, and I'm sitting and thinking, what can I do that's different? What can I do that's creative? What can I do that's special? What can I do that people will want to listen to? What can I say or do, or what guest can I interview? What topic can I take calls on that will make the show better? And some days these ideas just flow like crazy. Other days I'm staring at a blank piece of paper because I can't think of anything. Why? I was intrigued by the subject of our guest's book. It's called The Imagination Muscle: Where Good Ideas Come From and How to Have More of Them. Its author is Albert Redd. He is the former managing director of Condé Nast Britain, also a former journalist. And again, this book, The Imagination Muscle, has everybody on multiple continents talking about it. Albert, thanks so much for joining me on the radio. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Albert, you've got an incredible career in business and in journalism. Of all the things to focus on, how did you pick imagination?
The imagination, it's something that's always been on my mind, so to speak, as something we don't talk about enough. For me, the imagination is something that is within us. And you were talking about it just now in a very interesting way. And what I wanted to do with this book was to encourage readers to consider the possibility that the imagination is not something random and fixed and kind of bestowed on us from above. It's something that you can work at. It's a muscle, like a physical muscle, which you can develop and train, and you can be more imaginative than you thought you could be. So I'd say everyone's got an imagination. They just need to know how to use it. And this book is designed to give you inspiration for ideas about how you might go about being more creative in your own day-to-day life.
So just as if I'm working out and I'm lifting weights, I'll become stronger. And if I'm running, I'll be able to run faster and farther. If I use some of the strategies in the imagination muscle, I'll be able to have greater imagination in my life.
That's correct. And the point I also make is the imagination in business, in science, in the arts, it's the same thing. The power of idea generation comes from the same habits of behavior that we see in history throughout different disciplines. And if we can just systemize those ways of thinking, then we can become a lot more imaginative ourselves, and we can become much more successful in the worlds we're in.
A lot of things that I want to focus on that you covered in the book, and I've really been enjoying reading it all week. But for starters, maybe the most important part of our conversation for people listening, give us a few tips. What's a tip that you can give me or our listeners about how we can flex that imagination muscle? What's the imagination equivalent of lifting weights?
The imagination, the equivalent is the very basic things one can do. I think the first thing is to be more attentive to the moments in your day when you have ideas that come naturally. And you may not even realize you're having ideas. And the famous one is in the shower. You have ideas when you're in the shower because your mind declutches. It removes itself from the day-to-day thinking, and ideas come to you in that moment. And someone like Aaron Sorkin, who wrote The West Wing, when he's writing, he has many showers a day because that allows him his brain just to declutch and to allow it to free float a bit in away from the normal pressures of day to day. The other way that people have ideas is walking. The great poets of the English countryside would walk for miles and miles, and they would find ideas would come flooding to them. And I find the same thing. If you walk, after about half an hour's walk, I find myself having ideas. And there are other quirkier ideas that people have used in history. I mean, Vladimir Nabokov, the writer, used to find sitting in a parked car after a long journey, he'd have ideas flooding into his mind. So there are various techniques you can use. The other one that is really having what I call a beginner's mindset, allowing yourself become a beginner at something. If you're getting on in life and you become very, very good at one part and one thing, if you're a scientist, become an artist, be a beginner at an artist, start taking up a new habit in your life. And that will open up synaptic pathways which will allow your brain to get better at what you originally did. So to give you an example, there's a kind of amazing fact that many of the Nobel Prize winners in science were also beginners at art. They were struggling artists. So someone like Richard Feynman, the physicist, was also an artist, or Einstein would play the violin. So they had this other part of their life which would bring out their beginners, a curiosity and an open-mindedness, which perhaps they'd lost in their day job, as it were. So I would encourage everybody to have something else going on the side where they are a beginner.
Well, that is really interesting. So Sherlock Holmes was onto something with playing that violin.
Correct.
One of the things that I just thinking about this in the last 24 hours found interesting is the ideas that come to you when you're by yourself, as in walking or in the shower, versus when you're in a group. We had a staff meeting after our show yesterday, the guys that work on our show and our boss, and we were talking about a lot of interesting ideas. And I found as the meeting was going on that just having the discussion, it spurred a lot of interesting ideas about the things that we were talking about in me. And I found that it did the same thing in others as well. What does your research show, Albert, about the benefit of working in a group versus working individually?
I think that working in a group has to be very carefully managed. And I did this at Condé Nast when I was running the UK business. You have to create an environment of what one calls psychological safety, where people are allowed to have bad ideas, where bad ideas can float around without any fear of failure or humiliation in front of your peers, because often a bad idea is something that is the germ of a good idea. So one aspect of idea generation in a group is to allow things just to bubble up and to seem a bit crazy, but that will lead another person's mind to take it in another direction. So I think the dynamic of a group is difficult, particularly in a hierarchy, but it can be done, and I think it's very important to get it right. I think one of the things that I when I was running the Condé Nast business was to create an expectation of ideas. You come into the office every morning, your business is not just about doing the job, it's about doing the job better. It's about finding new ways of improving the business in whatever business you're in. So I think that's another sort of cultural element of business where the imagination needs to play a very important part, and that has to be instilled in the people who work in the group.
What about, you talk about being a beginner at something, which I can certainly see the value of, and it's forcing me to think in a new way about a number of different ways that I can be a beginner at something. But in terms of just getting out of the groupthink box, that it's so easy for anybody that works in the media or anybody that's in any sort of a workplace or that does anything, it's so easy to get roped into groupthink. How do we get out of just basically these echo chambers of sameness and get exposed to new things?
I think you're touching on a very important point here, which is we tend to be driven increasingly by the algorithm. We all are drawn and taken on our phones towards the same content, or decreasing spirals of the content that the algorithm thinks we need to see. I think we have to get out of that pattern. And the way to do that is to, again, be a beginner at something. Stare at something you don't fully understand, whether it's a work of art or whether it's a book about a subject you're not familiar with. Read what no one else is reading. Find your own space in terms of idea generation. And one of the things that I write about in the book is really the people who we think of as being very original were, I write about Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton. Really what he did, what his brilliance was having his own imaginative palette, as I call it, where you're drawing ideas from very unexpected sources and pulling them together. So he had the biography of Hamilton, he had the traditions of musical theatre, he had hip hop and rap, and he had the narrator as nemesis, Aaron Burr from Jesus Christ Superstar. So he was able to combine things in a completely new way, and that really was a consequence of him, reading what no one else is reading. I mean, nobody else in his space was reading a biography of Hamilton and making that connection. So you have to begin to have ideas that nobody else is having. You have to create the fertile territory, as it were, the fertile bed of observations and reading and experience that nobody else is having. And that's harder than ever, I have to say, because we all we all follow the same people on Twitter, on X, on Instagram, and there's a pressure in society to do what everyone else is doing and to have the same. But then you just have the same ideas.
If people are just tuning in, we're talking with Albert Reid. His new book is The Imagination. Reid, excuse me. I apologize.
Don't worry.
His new book is The Imagination Muscle, where good ideas come from and how to have more of them. Albert, can you share a personal eureka moment when you realized the power of imagination?
Well, I think this book was in a way, was a kind of, in a sort of self-fulfilling way. This book came together in a way that I hadn't foreseen until I wrote it. Writing a book is really hard, really difficult, and to find something that gels and brings things together in a way that makes sense is a wonderful feeling. And that for me was identifying a theme that I don't think anybody else has really written about. This idea of the imagination as being something you can flex, something you can develop, something you can build in strength. And the idea that we take care of, as I said before, is that we take care of our physical health and we pay attention to our emotional well-being as we should, but we don't really pay attention to our imaginative health. And that, for me, is something which is so important, so fundamental to society. And I believe, and the research that I cover in the book shows this, that using your imagination, being creative, makes you happier, makes you more grounded. It makes you more alive. And for me, that's a message we need to get out more and more. And I believe it's really crucial to every aspect of our societies, both on an individual level, but also on a group level, on a national level, in terms of how we progress in civilization. The imagination is what's powered us forward to where we've got to, and it's what's going to take us forward in the future.
How do you personally, other than taking a walk or taking a shower, how do you personally exercise your imagination muscle daily?
The thing that I do when I can, and is the thing that I find the thing that I find very effective for my own idea generation is what I call the waking moment. It's the first 2 hours in the day. If I'm able to, if the day allows it, I wake up early. I go straight to my desk and I work and I write, and I don't look at my email. If you look at your email or you look at the news, you're done. It's finished. It's all over. So you have this kind of pure half sleep, half awake sort of golden hour, or golden 2 hours if you're lucky, and that is when interesting things happen in your mind. That's when ideas. You're still got the freedom of the subconscious playing into the conscious, and that's a very, if you can cultivate, and that goes back to the shower and the walk. All these periods of time, these little moments in the day, these are the moments when the very powerful part of your brain, the unconscious, is allowed to just make little forays into your conscious mind, and that's when that's for me the mindset one wants to try and cultivate. And the early morning for me is a very powerful moment in the day when I can do that.
How important do you think trial and error is in the creative process? You talked about at Condé Nast, you giving people the freedom to come up with bad ideas. Is trial and error something that everybody should be utilizing, whether they're managers or just individuals?
Yes, it is. The great thing that holds us back as individuals is fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of getting things wrong. And I would encourage people to detach their creative work in whatever form it takes from any notion of success. I think if you want to try and be an artist or a writer, don't worry about success or failure, because that shouldn't be the metric. That shouldn't be the reason you're doing it. The reason you're doing it is because you're exercising your imagination muscle. You are opening up synaptic pathways. You're observing the world. You're building your curiosity about what's around you. And that's the important element. And the other thing that I'd say is every artist, every writer, every musician that you can think of who has achieved success has also had great failures. And, you can think of someone like David Bowie. He was Ziggy Stardust and he was Aladdin Sane, but he produced some really terrible music at the beginning of his career and some towards the end of his career. And, you can think of Steve Jobs, on the other hand, an entrepreneur, a visionary who, between the Apple Mac and the iPhone, creates the G4 Cube and the Apple Lisa. So you have this sort of, these enormous peaks and enormous troughs. But what these people realize is that it's in the act of trying, it's in the act of risk taking that you achieve these things, and there's more to be lost by not engaging.
And how? Trust me, if I had a nickel for every bad segment that I did on the radio, I'd be far wealthier than I am. Hey, finally, sir, we're just about out of time, but I do want to ask you this as the father of a young child. How do you think children can be encouraged to develop their imagination muscles, and how, if at all, is that different than what an adult would be doing?
I think the thing to do throughout education is to open your mind to different aspects and to see across boundaries. So to learn about science, learn about art, and to see the connection between the two. If that can be a sort of mindset that you start early on in life, then I think that gives you a tremendous advantage. And really, that's something we risk losing in life is being funneled into very narrow niches of education and expertise. Yeah. Whereas in the 18th and 19th centuries, people would naturally be poets and chemists, and that was never an issue. Whereas now we get driven into these furrows. So that's I'd encourage anyone with children to try and keep their experience broad and their curiosity open to wide sources of knowledge.
Albert Reid, I very much appreciate the conversation. I hope everyone checks out The Imagination Muscle, where good ideas come from and how to have more of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Good to talk.
Likewise, if you want to comment, feel free to do so. 800-848-9222, 800-848-9222, straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
I am unfamiliar with this song. This is Planet Rock, a Matt Blaze selection in honor of his birthday.
Did you just say you're unfamiliar with this song?
I think I am unfamiliar with it.
This song is like the foundation of hip-hop and freestyle.
Can't believe I missed
foundation.
All right. Well,
one of the most influential songs in hip-hop.
Well, I feel influenced already. If you want to know what kind of music we're playing, you can join the Facebook group. Just go on to Facebook and type Morano, Morano, radio, fans and haters, and we post the songs each and every morning there. Pete is in New Jersey. Hi, Pete.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Frank. Your interview with the British man was maximum great. From now on, I call him the coach because he's good. Social engineering relies upon screaming the most and the most and the loudest, and they are not always steering you in a good direction. I remember that in Elijah, in the Bible, Old Testament, God was in the whisper. He was not in the lightning, the earthquake, the hurricane, or any other thing. Elijah found that God was in the whisper, and that is Well, you get it, but your interview was marvelous, Mr.
Thank you.
Frank. Thank you.
It's awfully nice of you. Thank you, Pete. 800-848-9222. You know, it's funny. We're supposed to have a barbecue on Saturday, but my wife was saying to me yesterday that it's a 75% likelihood of rain. And apparently it's going to be the whole day. It's a whole day of rain. So we were kind of weighing whether we should just call it now, cancel it, and postpone it to the following Saturday as a rain date, or whether we should just play it by ear and see where things go Saturday. What do you think, Matt, as someone that was invited to this?
Call it.
Call it now.
Yeah, call it now.
Elias, as someone that may come, what do you think?
Yeah, give people a chance.
Yeah, okay, so maybe that's what we'll do. Keep asking questions.
Hey, it's Joe Piscopo. When you're looking for concrete materials for your next construction project, call Diamondback Ready Mix on Staten Island. This family-owned and operated business is the go-to supplier for concrete materials in New York, New Jersey, and the surrounding tri-state areas. My friends and experts from Diamondback Ready Mix are experts and fully licensed and insured in New York and in New Jersey to deliver ready-mix concrete to your job site. Give them a call today for more information at 718-650-5649, 718-650-5649.